Well, I think you know that this evening marks the end of the first season of Civic Discourse here at the Boston Athenaeum. This has been a collaborative event, a series of events for us, with our good friends at Suffolk University. And I'd like to pay tribute to all of those at Suffolk, those who are on the staff, those on the faculty, alumni, and close friends who have been such wonderful partners with us during the past year or so as we've worked to make Civic Discourse a reality here in Boston. And I'd like to pay particular tribute to my colleague, Ken Greenberg, who's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, who has been a wonderful, wonderful partner to work with during the past year or so. This partnership is going to continue. Next year, in February, we will be letting you know fairly soon what the topic is going to be. But my sense is that the one we've been working with for the last 3 to 4 months, Media and Democracy, has been a very strong one indeed. And who better to polish off that discussion than Lewis Lapham, who returns to the Athenaeum this evening to talk to us about what he calls mixed media. I think you all know that Lewis Lapham is the legendary, or has been the legendary, editor of Harper's Magazine over an almost 30-year tenure. Along the way, he has written in various other formats and has published an extraordinary number of important books. I'm going to mention just a few of them because they're so closely tied to the theme of our Civic Discourse initiative. Money and Class in America, that's 1988. Waiting for the Barbarians, 1997. Lapham's Rules of Influence, 1999. Lights, Camera, Democracy, 2001. Theater at War, 2003, a book he actually talked to us about several years ago. Gag Rule, 2004. And most recently, Pretensions to Empire, Notes on the Criminal Folly of the Bush Administration in 2006. So, Lewis Lapham is the host and author of the PBS series America's Century. He's been the host of the weekly PBS series Bookmark. He's currently the host of a program entitled The World in Time, which is a series of radio discussions with scholars and historians on Bloomberg Radio. Podcasts of those weekly talks are available. And he also, of course, has founded a new periodical, which is called Lapham's Quarterly, which is one of the most interesting new magazines on the market. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, I urge you to do so. There's only one subject each quarter. The subjects are very, very interesting. They're pertinent to the Civic Discourse series here. And it therefore gives me enormous pleasure to welcome back Lewis Lapham to the Boston Athenaeum.
I can't tell you how delighted I am to be back in the Athenaeum. I mean, this is sacred ground from my point of view. I mean, this is one of the most magnificent buildings and also one of the most magnificent ideas that I know of. And to stand in this room talking to this audience is truly a joy. I'm going to speak some, read some, talk some, and try to get done in 35 minutes, and hoping that there will be a lot of questions, because I like answering questions, and things occur to me that wouldn't have otherwise. I'm talking about mixed media and the siege of data to which we are all subject. The data, of course, is prioritized and context sensitive, but there's so much of it that we're buried in it. The full-page ads for Verizon, Sprint, AT&T announce they're pumping out every second of the day and night 8 billion bytes of algorithm on air, in print, broadcasts, podcasts, Twitter, blog. and you compound what they call the innovative delivery strategies with the multimedia interfacing supplied by Google, iTunes, Facebook, and the collective product invites comparison with all the grains of silicon on all the beaches of the Pacific Ocean. The force of the sandstorm blowing through the internet apparently threatens to carry away the tents of the print media. And not a day goes by without the report of another newspaper or magazine lost in the desert of bankruptcy. Condé Nast's portfolio, you will have noticed, disappeared on Monday of this week. And within the last 18 months, as many as 85 magazines have disappeared. I have a list of them somewhere, but they include Cosmo Girl, Travel and Leisure Golf, Trader Monthly, Deal Maker, Corporate Leader, and the Cigar Report. The newspapers have been going down like 10 pins for the last 2 years, ceasing to publish or cutting back their pages or jettisoning their foreign correspondents in Washington bureaus. Sam Zell, the chastened owner of the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times, compares his investment in the newspaper business to a vaccination with a live virus. Maureen Dowd, the New York Times columnist, goes to Mountain View, California, to interview Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google. And there, among the herb gardens and the Haribo gummy bears, she discovers that she belongs to a species on its way to extinction with the dinosaur and the dodo bird. Schmidt tells her that, yes, the internet is a sewer and a cesspool of disinformation, but so what? So are the La Brea tar pits. The Associated Press, meanwhile, threatens to sue Google for the theft of its content, and the editor of the Wall Street Journal describes certain websites, by which he means Google, as parasites and tapeworms in the intestines of the internet. The book publishers in New York that I know, and owners of bookstores and publishers, voice similar presentiments of doom. I hear it said that the bookstores are going the way of the passenger pigeon, the record store, and the audience for broadcast radio. And I've been told that in 10 years, the Kindle is expected to replace all the shelves in Borders and Barnes & Noble. Meanwhile, I'm sure all of you have any number of examples, but the kinds of communication that are available. There are 4.2 million surveillance cameras in England. I was, a week ago, I was on Vancouver Island, offshore British Columbia, and I went to visit a lighthouse, and at the tip of the lighthouse, at the tip of the island where the lighthouse is, there's a camera that you can operate from your own computer here in Boston and direct it in 6 or 7 different directions to take pictures of birds, peregrine falcons, passing whales, the weather. I mean, I am speechless in front of the various possibilities with what's available. And I think about it, and I think it's only fair to draw 2 conclusions, neither of them conducive to the hope of democratic self-government. First conclusion is that the more data we collect, the less likely we are to know what it means. And the second is we're at a loss for a common language in which to sustain the illusion of a common store of value or meaning. As far as the more we know, the less we know, I think all you have to do is look at the wreckage in Wall Street and the global economy. For the last year, we've been listening to Mr. Paulson, Mr. Rubin, various prominent bankers in Wall Street trying to explain what happened. And as far as I can understand, practically none of them know. I mean, they don't really know how much money has been lost. I've heard estimates of 14 trillion. I've heard other estimates of 63 trillion. The bailouts come, and then out of nowhere there appear another several $100 billion that have been unaccounted for, and this despite a truly wonderful array of technological digital enhancements, quants, mechanical models, derivatives, credit, collateralized debt obligations, and so forth. In other words, an immense amount of data, and nobody quite knowing what any of it means. And I get a feeling, I remember the old fairy tale about the sorcerer's apprentice. And here we have the bankers have got the water buckets moving, and they don't know how to stop them or where they're going, and they don't know how to appease the wrath of Mammon. Niall Ferguson, the historian, wrote a book, he published a book recently called The Ascent of Money, which is a marvelous book. It's a history of money. And he says we've gotten to the point where all we know how to do is worship. There are $3.2 trillion in the international currency market orbiting the globe at any 1 second. I mean, it's a vast circle of energy moving around the Earth at the speed of light, which kind of is a compression of all the world's desire, and you can tap into it from anywhere. You can play that market seated on a yacht in the Caribbean. You can be in a trading pit in Shanghai or Mumbai or New York, and nobody knows how to control it. They're not even sure where it's going. And the Ferguson compares our financial instruments and institutions to dinosaurs. I mean, it's a funny parallel. He's talking the same way that Maureen Dowd is talking, and he's talking about what's going on now in the international financial markets as the great dying. Compares it to the dinosaurs that were wiped out by meteors. And it's again, there is more than can be seen, explained, or understood. And he also remarks on the innumeracy of the American citizenry. I mean, how badly educated many of us are when it comes to simple mathematics and numbers and working out the differences between mean average and statistics. And you find the same situation in the nation's schools. For the last 15, 20 years, we've been reading stories about the failures of American education, despite large appropriations of money, all kinds of digital aids and enhancements, and yet there are, by the government's estimate, 40 million illiterates in the United States at the moment, people barely able to read a menu or a road sign. And what it brings down to us, to me, I mean, the mixed media, it's an epistemological problem. What counts as a claim to knowledge? How do we know what we think we know? What is the difference between how we know and what we know? And how do we make the distinctions between the various forms of knowledge as information, data, belief, sense perception, reason, emotion? All of them, all of these ways of learning make a claim to knowledge, but we mix them up. And this was confirmed by my experience some years ago teaching a course of English composition at Yale University. I found only 4 of the 12 students in the class capable of writing a coherent paragraph. Not because they weren't intelligent, but because they never had acquired the habit of reading. They were familiar with a vast archive of visual images, and they easily could recall scenes and fragments of scenes from Star Wars or Melrose Place or Late Night with David Letterman. But books were grim tasks instead of pleasant diversions. Foreign objects, unfamiliar and vaguely ominous, meant to be studied as if they were cancer cells multiplying under the lens of a microscope or of a jigsaw puzzle constructed from the bones of a triceratops. Similar observations have been made, of course, by many other people, but never more entertainingly than by Richard Lederer, a teacher at the St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, who pieced together a history of the world from sentences then appearing in classrooms, 8th grade to first year of college, across the whole of the United States. And I will abbreviate. His history was very long, and I will simply read a few of the sentences in that history of the world. The inhabitants of ancient Egypt were mummies. They traveled by Camelot. The Greeks invented 3 kinds of columns: Corinthian, Doric, and Ironic. They also had myths. A myth is a female moth. Sir Francis Drake circumcised the world with a 100-foot clipper. When Elizabeth exposed herself before her troops, they all shouted, "Hurrah!" Then her navy went out and defeated the Spanish armadillo. So I'm a disciple of McLuhan, and McLuhan, in his Understanding Media, which was published in 1964, projects the transference of the nation's preferred forms of expression from the idioms of print to those of the electronic medium. In his book, he describes an acoustic world, one with no continuity, no stasis, which comes at us from all directions. A totally new information environment of which humanity has never had any experience whatever. Now, McLuhan is writing that 45 years ago, and what he had to say then makes a great deal more sense now. I mean, his prescience has become manifest in cyberspace with instruments that he did not live to see shaped into silicon and glass. And nevertheless, I think his understanding of what was happening holds up. He framed his observations on the premise that we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. And then he proceeds to an analogy between the 15th century invention of movable type and the 19th century invention of the electric light bulb. And just as the printing press incited a revolution that overturned a settled aesthetic and political order, so do the practical applications of electricity configured as telephone, telegraph, computer, movie camera, and television screen. The visual order of the printed page supports a perception of the world biased in favor of sequence, narrative, hierarchy, argument, classification, and reason. McLuhan thought of print as visual and television as tactile and oral. Content follows form, we become what we behold, and the insurgent technologies give rise to new structures of feeling and thought. Glimpses of the world derived from the electronic media shape a sensibility geared to improvisation, discontinuity, repetition, simultaneity, ritual, and incantation. And the point that McLuhan was making is that the habit of mind associated with a rule of images, which is the one under which we now live, destroys the civilization dependent upon the meaning of words. As recently as 1960, it was still possible to make distinctions between what were then known as the seven lively arts, the various audiences recognizing the differences between the vocabularies of literature, journalism, politics, music, and the movies. The distinctions blurred under the technical and epistemological pressures of the late 20th century, and as the lines between fact and fiction become as irrelevant as they were difficult to distinguish, the lively arts fused into the amalgam of forms known as the media. The special effects are astonishing. By 1980, the theater of celebrity had replaced the old religious theater, in which Poseidon and Zeus once produced cataclysmic floods and heavenly fires with the effortless aplomb of ABC's Wide World of Sport. And if you remember the news coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom, the information and disinformation were so deftly intercut with the frontline first impressions, the images so quickly revised, repeated, updated, cross-promoted, or shifted to another camera angle, mortar rounds entering stage left, artillery barrage exiting stage right, 2- and 3-star generals parading to and fro on Tom Brokaw's reviewing stand, the correspondent aboard an aircraft carrier handing the microphone across a split screen to the correspondent embedded in a Bradley fighting vehicle. And before the invasion was 2 days north of Kuwait, the coverage was as impenetrable as the sandstorm descending on the 3rd Infantry Division's auxiliary helicopters. The computer animations, the weapon systems, and the tactical movements looked like video games. The virtual views of the topography, like the golf course graphics deployed to illustrate the perils of the PGA Tour. The fireworks display over the old romantic Baghdad, within a matter of 2 days, inspired heroic feats of merchandising, not only on the part of the Pentagon and White House briefing officers, but also among the manufacturers of cigars and women's underwear. Their flurry of applications for the trademark shock and awe, competing with those submitted by the makers of dollhouse furnishings, ski boots, mouse pads, teddy bears, smoking jackets, yo-yos, and inflatable bathtub toys. All of those products seeking to bear the notion shock and awe. By eliminating the dimensions of space and time, the accelerated data streams of the electronic media also eliminate the association of cause with effect. In place of narrative, the cameras provide montage. The rules of grammar and syntax give way to an arrangement of glyphs and ideographs like those seen on the neon signs in Times Square. Nothing necessarily follows from anything else. Sequence becomes merely additive instead of causative. Knowledge becomes a matter of instantly recognizing patterns, and the time is always now, if not on Channel 4 in New York, on Channel 27 in Rangoon, or Channel 341 in Sydney. One understands, by recognizing patterns, that the United States Senate is not a golf ball, that Liz Claiborne is a dress, and that it wasn't Osama bin Laden who shot Martin Luther King. And the making of these connections, as many as 12,000 of them in the course of an afternoon's shopping or an evening's programming, constitutes the proof of genius and the sum of wisdom. Being in the know, part of the joke, making the connection, but not necessarily carrying it any further than a simple connection. I mean, no narrative comes out of it, no argument. The point was never better illustrated than on September 11th, 2002, in New York City by the pageant commemorating the first anniversary of America's lost innocence. The lead editorial in that morning's Daily News spoke to the difficulty of the performance. The editorial writer says, "What can be said that hasn't been said? What can be written that hasn't been written?" It wasn't that the city lacked for citizens capable of both high-end philosophy and noble speech, but so many people were presenting so many shows of grief or patriotism that the vast cloud of inchoate emotion drifting across the television screens suppressed, as if with the rhetorical equivalent of tear gas, even the most stubborn attempts to make sense of the occasion. So much was being said or seen that nothing could be heard. In place of words, the planners offered images, multicultural and generic, expressive of anything and everything the spectators chose to see, wish for, or believe. Moments of silence interspersed with the tolling of church bells, a scattering of roses with the trembling of candlelight, the wiping away tears ritual performed by a troupe of Native Americans, Yo-Yo Ma playing Ave Maria on the cello, a groundbreaking for the Garden of Healing on Staten Island, numerous exhibits of melancholy photographs and inspirational quilts, the chanting of Buddhist monks cross-cut with the murmuring of Catholic priests, firehouse chalkboards displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the bookstores selling out their inventories of a book entitled Chicken Soup for the Soul of America. The day ended in an attitude of prayer, but it was by no means easy to know to whom or for what the congregation prayed. The postmodern imagination is a product of the electronic media, but as a means of perception, it is more accurately described as pre-Christian. The vocabulary is necessarily primitive, substituting rumor for evidence, emotion for reason, legend for history. Just as the ancient Greeks assigned trace elements of the divine to trees and wind and stones, a river god sulks and the child drowns, a sky god smiles and the corn ripens, the constant viewer learns to assign similar powers not only to whales and spotted owls, but also to individuals wearing the robes of celebrity. The personal outpoints the impersonal, and whether in Washington hearing rooms or Hollywood restaurants, names take precedence over things, the actor over the act. The camera sees but doesn't think, and seems to impart meaning where no meaning exists. People who worship the idols of their own invention, whether in the shape of an iPod or a credit default swap, find proofs of divinity in the blessings of an icon, whether in the person of Tiger Woods or Warren Buffett. They assume that by stringing the beads of public faces on a therapeutic thread of private reverie, they have said something profound. Apparently, it never occurs to them that they speak a language geared to the specifications of a machine in a magic kingdom where, in Simone Weil's apt but bleak phrase, it is the thing that thinks and the man who was reduced to the state of the thing. And you sort of see this in a progression of American presidents over the last 30 years. With Reagan, we had an actor playing a politician. With the elder Bush, a politician trying to play a politician. With Clinton, a politician playing an actor. With Bush II, a politician playing an action hero. And with Obama, we now have an avatar for the World of Warcraft. Most of the discussion, go back to the confusion in the media, about the restructuring of the news and entertainment media, turns on the question of where and how the new money will be made, who gets to own what, to control the flows of data. And this is consistent with the history of great American fortunes. All the really big money in the United States has been made by capturing the transportation, whether it was canals or railroads, shipping lanes or pipelines. And the notion of controlling the media pipelines is also consistent with McLuhan's observation that as commodities come to possess more and more the character of information, the amassment of wealth comes to depend upon the naming of things rather than the making of things. I mean, this would explain the Wall Street debacle. By inventing things that you can call a credit default swap or a derivative and so on, you are amassing wealth, but it is a naming of something, not a making of something. As an editor and a writer, of course, I'm interested in the commercial consequences of the disturbance in the atmosphere, but the consequences that strike me as the more ominous are those likely to put an end to both the theory and practice of democratic self-government. The epistemological revolution sets up the field of play not only for the makers of Ponzi schemes, for Citigroup and J.P. Morgan, as well as for Bernie Madoff, but also for the dealers in quack religion and fascist politics. Which maybe accounts for the dissolving of such a thing as a coherent body politic into separate states of wishful thinking, receding from one another literally at the speed of light. The trend has been remarked upon by various professors of political science, worried about the prospects of the American idea. The technologies make it possible to divide the American citizenry into constituencies of one. The weakening of the social contract encourages the broad retreat to the pools of Narcissus, where the summer nights are loud with the croaking of frogs. Again, this is another point that was made by McLuhan. It was also made recently by Nicholas Negroponte over here at MIT, who, when trying to talk about many of the blogs and a lot of the Facebook and Twittering that goes on in the internet, referred to it as a newspaper called The Daily Me. And somebody else, another writer, was suggesting that we now live in a post-fact society. In other words, the bleakest assessment is a pre-literate people living in a post-fact society. I mean, that's one way of summing up our present circumstance. And maybe the technology is still too new. 25 years haven't passed since the general introduction of the personal computer, and the World Wide Web hasn't been in place for more than 20 years. Even the television networks, despite their mechanical sophistication and longer terms of experiment, haven't yet evolved past the stage of very complicated toys. In the excited rush into cyberspace, wiring every circuit into every other circuit and staking claims to anything and everything that can be shipped by satellite to Shanghai, few people have taken the trouble to explore the possibilities of a new language. And this was, again, something that McLuhan was mindful of. He points out that Gutenberg invents the movable press at the end of the 15th century, but it's another 100 years before we get to Cervantes and Montaigne and Shakespeare. And for a while, there's a great deal of confusion and lots of people who were not established by the church or not, who did not have the custodianship of the traditional means of instruction, were suddenly printing their own books in vernacular languages. And I think that it's conceivable that we're in a period where we need a new language in which to, because what we've got now doesn't really fit. I mean, you have so many people talking to themselves. That doesn't go along with the notion of democracy, which is an idea where we learn from each other, and it's face to face. And then how do you make a new language that is kind of made out of glyphs and rebuses and the short forms that you see on Twitter or on some of the email? I'm hopeful. I think we will invent such a language on which there can be some kind of common agreement as to what is our common store of value and meaning, and that to me resides in language. That's what this building is about. That's what democracy is about, and we have a serious epistemological problem at the moment, I think. Again, as I say, I'm hoping for the best, and I'm anxious to answer any questions. Perhaps I'm too pessimistic. And again, I grew up as reading newspapers. I started out as a newspaper reporter before I became a magazine writer. And so I like to read a newspaper and come across things by accident and get a view of what's happening in different parts of the world, stuff that I would never know how to search for on a computer. In other words, it's the breadth of the canvas that keeps me in, or at least gives me the impression that I'm learning things from outside my immediate interest or presupposition. But I cannot possibly argue with the uses of the internet as a means of correspondence. It's truly a wonder to behold in that sense. I think we had it in the Bush administration. I mean, we certainly. I mean, if you remember the terror alerts, if you understand, if you've been through an airport lately, well, the Department of Homeland Security, the wiretapping of phones, and yes, frightening people. And another way of frightening people, of course, is to put them in debt, which our lords and masters in both Wall Street and Washington have managed to do to great numbers of the American people. So yeah, no, I mean, I can see a change in a different form of government, like my friend over here, but it would be in an autocratic, fascist direction. Fascist in the sense of the word that it's a combination of state and corporate power. I'm not using it. I'm using it in its meaning before 1939, which it was something that Roosevelt actually spoke about. He was afraid that he was afraid that there would become a kind of fascism in the U.S. He was talking that way in the 30s. But that kind of fear is always useful to people in power. Okay.
You've quoted someone as saying the internet is a sewer of misinformation.
Yeah, that was Mr. Eric Schmidt.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you don't see the possibility of the internet self-correcting, of really being its own fact checker as time goes on.
Its own fact. What would be the? How would that work? I mean, do you have a lot of? We take the entire staff of the Athenaeum and turn them into checkers.
But it's even misinformation, you hear from people who say this is misinformation and here's what is correct. I mean,
well, doesn't Wikipedia try something of that sort? I mean, it tries to correct itself? Yeah. Well, again, I mean, it's as the gentleman here said, there are, people will find that there are some sites on the, in the web that you can trust and others that you can't. And you learn to salvage the bright bracelet from the sewer. It was under strenuous attack during the Bush administration, I think. And I think for it, I'm not sure it has survived undamaged. But again, for the Constitution to survive, people have to know what's in it, and for one, and have to make that argument in public in a political context. But what you're saying goes to what the gentleman over there was saying, that again, democracy is it is the most difficult form of government, and it has survived from time to time over the last 2,000 years. If you ask me, I would think we will find some other form of government. Yeah, well, I mean, some kind of combination of corporate and state power, whether you call it oligarchy, whether you call it fascism. And we won't call it fascism, we'll have a much friendlier label. But I think it's Aristotle who, you correct me if I'm wrong, but has the series of things go in cycles. I mean, oligarchy turns rancid and selfish and too stupid to be believed, and is therefore, then there's a revolution, and you get, usually tyranny follows that. I'm trying to stay with Aristotle, and then tyranny becomes so oppressive that you have revolution, you get back to democracy, and so on, and it keeps going around in circles. But you have to see, I mean, the problem of control of people is going to be, I mean, if you look at the next 20 or 30 years, we now have 6 billion people in the world, there are going to be 9 billion by 2040. There will be fewer resources, food, oil, water. There will be more anger. There will be more need for control, whether that takes the form of wiretapping or, as we now have, when the president travels. I don't know how, protesters are confined to free speech zones, usually 2 blocks from the motorcade. There were, when Obama was inaugurated, there were 20,000 troops, military as well as police, within a 20-mile radius of the Capitol, helicopters overhead, Navy ships in the Potomac River. So now, assume that you're going to get a lot more, there'll be many more poor people who are angry and hard-pressed. So good government will really kind of be a synonym for crowd control. No, I mean, but it is controlled by being corralled in the internet. You see what I mean? If it's not taking a public form, then it is just a very bespoke bread and circus, tailored for the individual dissident. But if they can keep you in front of your computer with your website and not have it take action. Now, there's some question as to how much the internet and the communications in the web had to do with the election of Obama. And if that's true, and I don't know if it is or not, but if it is, there is a way in which the democratic principle can operate via the computer. But it didn't keep us out of Iraq, and it's not going to keep us out of Afghanistan. I don't have a good answer to that, but I can say that McLuhan believed in that kind of an idea. He called it. McLuhan is the guy that invented the term global village, and he also had another notion called the hive mind, which was kind of if I understand you correctly, that kind of collective intelligence. But I don't know how it actually works. Certainly, many more of us can have access to much more information. I mean, I can communicate with people in New Zealand or Iceland and so on, and we can share certain kinds of information. But then you get back into the epistemology question. Which claims to knowledge matter? The word to know in French and Spanish doesn't quite mean the same thing as it does in English. So I would love to see that, but I mean that of course is I'm also a believer in the UN. Well, you asked that question. I have just come from a college, which is not an American college, by the way, but it is in Canada, where it works magnificently. It's called the Lester Pearson College. It's on Vancouver Island. And what they do is they take 200 students, 16 to 18, from 100 different countries. So you have people from East Timor and Thailand, as well as from Palestine. From the Palestine and Israel and Africa and so on. Everybody, it's a 2-year course. They teach a syllabus called the International Baccalaureate, which is based on this whole problem of how do we know what we know. It's not the kind of syllabus that you'd find in most American schools, but it is accepted by Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and so on. And I spent 2 days there, and to watch these kids talk to each other, coming at the questions from truly very different points on the compass, and trying to work with the problem of how do we know what we know, what is true? Is what is true true, or is what is true what I believe to be true? I mean, that kind of question. And so it can work. And I just saw a wonderful example of it. By the way, the school is entirely free. And there are 12 of them in the world. They're called the United World Colleges. They have one in Wales, Norway, Italy, Hong Kong, and so on. And it was very exciting. I mean, I have seen education work. I mean, my experience has usually been the encounter with a particular teacher or with a contemporary. I mean so yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the chief object in education is to give the student confidence in his or her own mind, and how you do that is, and that can be done almost anywhere. And it can be done with an equation. It could be done with a line of Greek. It can be done with the dissection of a frog. I'm not so high or enthusiastic about the standard forms of testing. You know, the SATs and the note Child Left Behind programs. I mean, that can be truly debilitating. I have this new journal called Lapham's Quarterly, which is has an educational purpose, and we give subscriptions to the 5,000 members of the National Council of History Education. These are history teachers all over the United States. And I went to their conference here in Boston a month ago, their annual conference, and talked to a lot of them. These are very active. I would say these are probably the best of their kind, because they're looking for new ways, new materials to awaken their students. And then they talk to you about what happens in practice when you get back to Dayton, Ohio, or Omaha, Nebraska, and then you're not only up against the state authorities, it's also the local school board, it's the parents association and so forth, and there are a lot of constraints that they're working under. They don't have the freedom to pursue and develop an individual student's best instincts. But there, again, there are exceptions to everything. I mean, I would not make a blanket statement about American schools, but nevertheless, you read the various reports where it shows that our kids tend to fall behind. I mean, they're among the, in the 5th grade, they're at the very highest levels when compared to kids in other countries. And by the time they get to the 12th grade, they're down ranked 23rd or something. Something about the way our system works dulls the mind and teaches them to major in failure and low expectation. I don't know enough about it to know why, but I've been told by people who do know more about it than I do. Advertising is the great American art form, right? Updike once wrote an essay in which he said that when he imagined somebody in 100 years from now looking back at American civilization, and he thought that in order to find the greatest expression of our civilization's art form, they would be looking at advertising. In other words, that would be the equivalent of Chartres Cathedral or the Roman Colosseum. So yeah, you can do a great deal with advertising. I mean, sure. I mean, the corporations were selling cigarettes when they knew that they were harmful. Liquor companies do the same. So, I mean, caveat emptor, on the other hand, you have various individuals, corporation presidents, chairmen, directors, and so on, who take a very serious interest in American education. Yes, sir.
I'm a Latin teacher. It's my job to motivate kids and get them to learn the vocabulary and assemble the vocabulary into speeches, and then to give the speeches and hopefully participate in democratic life. So if we imagine Barack Obama is this large media feast, the piece that I take away from that is the story that, yes, even you can learn how to make a speech and grow up and become president someday. That's helpful to me, and that's what I take. Now, am I naive to believe that? When I see Barack Obama making these speeches on TV and addressing these issues that he seems to be addressing, is he really making the speeches and really addressing the issues, or does it just look like he's doing so on TV?
Well, part of your question is easy to answer. Yes, it does look like that on TV, okay? So we know that part's right, okay? Whether the first part is right, we don't, at least I don't know yet, which could speak to his skill, again, as well, I mentioned him in terms of an avatar in World of Warcraft, and I think he got elected on those kind of, with that kind of expectation, right? As if politics, American politics was like American warfare, is some kind of a video game. All I can say is, as a general rule, which would agree with my historian friend, is that when all states, all governments are always going to be wanting to seize power. This is their métier. And they usually do it under the guise of protecting the American people. We are doing this for your own good. I mean, that is the standard rubric under which power is seized. Even Machiavelli would have agreed with that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, any seizing of power on the part of a government is usually presented as in order to protect you.
I agree with you that dissent has been corralled into the internet and that much of it is narcissistic, but I wonder what other options we have today. It seems to me that 70 years ago, if you're an average person, your only option is to write a letter to the editor in your paper, talk with your friends after work, whereas now everyone has a voice, and it may be ignored, it may be one of many, but isn't that a net gain for the voice of the citizenry?
Yes, that's a net gain, but on the other hand, there are also, I believe, and I can be standing, again, I don't have the number, there are either 17,000 or 80,000 political offices in the country. It's got to be closer to 80,000, not 17, but because I'm talking about sewer districts, school boards, county clerk, and so on. And you could take it one step further. I will agree with you that good things have come out of the internet and the media that are not narcissistic, like the gentleman talking about the community of scholars, or about the groundswell for Obama press board by MoveOn.org. But the next step is then to run for office or work for some. There are all kinds of organizations and associations that allow for public service. Some of them elected, some of them philanthropic, some of them public, some of them private. But there are very many doors into the public square in the United States, which is one of my reasons for wanting to keep the democratic idea going a few years longer.